That is a source of groundwater for the cities of St. Paul, New Brighton, Shoreview, Van Ness Heights, and White Bear Township. So combined, that is a source water area for that is a source of groundwater for the cities of St. Paul. So that just reiterates that land use in some parts of the region may impact larger populations and White Bear Township. And so again, that is a source water area for communities using drinking groundwater as their drinking water. So that just reiterates that next slide may impact larger populations and White Bear Township. And so again, that is a source water area for communities using drinking groundwater as their drinking water. So that just reiterates that next slide may impact larger populations and White Bear Township. And so again, that is a source water area for communities. Right, can you advance the groundwater as their drinking water? So that just reiterates that next slide may impact larger population and White Bear Township. And so again, that is a source water area for communities. Right, can you advance the groundwater as their drinking water? So that just reiterates that next slide may impact larger population and White Bear Township. So again, related to the groundwater duismas from the previous slide, the Met Council and Department of Health are looking at the overlapping duismas in the West Metro to investigate streamlining wellhead protection efforts. These duismas all have vulnerability designations that have again related to the groundwater duismas, and those designations indicate the Met Council and Department of Health are looking at within the drinking water supply management area to investigate streamlining to contaminate a public supply well. So those ratings are based on the geologic vulnerability designations that have again well construction, maintenance, and use, and those designations water council and Department of Health. So the study area right now, seen on the slide, spans from Richmond to Minneapolis. The shades of gray correspond to the vulnerability ratings of those duismas that have been designated by the individual communities, and the blue areas represent the areas of overlap, so overlapping duismas that have different vulnerability designations to Minneapolis. So the blue shades of gray, there is the map key, but the light blue would represent areas where one community designated an area that is low, and the blue and another community also uses that area as overlapping duismas, designated that area as a high vulnerability. So the blue. So just visually, this shows the complexity of the duismas in the West Metro and reveals the potential challenges in wellhead protection. So areas with conflicting vulnerabilities must be treated very differently by the communities that area. So one might ask, where these communities visually overlap the complexity, do they agree or do they disagree about vulnerability? And how does one community impact another's wellhead protection plan and implementation? The previous round of comprehensive plans to this drought. So just like previous meetings, we will have two speakers. Lisa may or may not be able to show up. Something just popped up for her. But yes, we will start with Valerie, and she will share some perspectives. So just like collaboration on source water, and then I will go after her. But just two speakers, Lisa may or may not give some more points and comments for that, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So Valerie, I will let you start. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Emily. So I'm Valerie Gerber. I'm the Dakota County Groundwater Protection Unit Supervisor. I've been with Dakota County for a little over 2 years now and pretty new to this committee. So this is really my first year at county and kind of really lays out what we're going to be doing. We are getting, so obviously having support from our leadership is significantly important. Luckily, the groundwater plan really lays that out and generates that support from the board as well as our local partners, since they helped us generate the groundwater plan. And then also it opens it up for funding. So we actually did just get an MDH grant for their accelerated groundwater protection that's going to help fund that stakeholder engagement that we're doing with the agricultural community. So that's really important. And then as we move forward, we're really hoping to continue this work is connecting with our stakeholders, so not only the agricultural community, our cities, our townships, our watershed management organizations, and really just bringing them all together to figure out what do we need to do going forward. And I think I saw that the TAC, one of their suggestions with very specific recommendations. So that is our goal of what to do with some of these, additional plans that we're going forward, to set very specific goals and recommendations on how to address those issues. So I think, I think the last question you guys had was council, how can the TAC help? So I think funding is always really important. Bringing everybody to the table in collaboration with the state agencies and other organizations that might be out there that are really interested. Filling in the gaps, I think, is really important. So we do a lot of research in Dakota County, but what else should we be considering for protection, or what other research should we be considering? So other tools that might be very useful, for example, model ordinances or educational materials that can really help us focus and branch those out with collaboration. So I think that's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Emily, did you want to go straight into yours, or do we want any questions or comments in between?
I will go into mine, and then we can hold questions at the end.
Okay.
I just have a couple more points to add, because I'll be talking about the West Metro Wellhead Protection Plan pilot. And I brought this up in a couple slides ago, so I just want to share a few more items about that project. So again, this work is being done with the Department of Health, and it is an exploration of an alternative multi-community wellhead protection planning process. So the goal of this work is to improve the wellhead protection plan creation and amendment process to make it easier and more streamlined for public water suppliers as well as Department of Health staff. So we see that many communities, particularly in the West Metro, like from the previous slide, has overlapping dewismas, and wellhead and groundwater actions have a higher potential to impact one another. And we also saw that some of these overlapping areas have different vulnerability designations, which impacts the land use activities and choices for a community, and the probability that one community's action can impact another community's water supply. So this pilot project will look at removing some of those discrepancies and to approach wellhead protection planning more collaboratively with the goal to protect the shared resource. So as for resources needed to do this work, we are at the stage where building support is key. For this type of collaboration to be successful, the public water supplier support from those West Metro communities will be critical to then encourage other neighboring communities to partner with and encourage even more to participate once we get to the stage of defining what this new process could look like. So just like Valerie mentioned, MOSAC can be very impactful with this work by supporting the efforts of the Department of Health and these communities, and encouraging the state of Minnesota to fund this work, since it would be a benefit that extends beyond community boundaries. The next steps and where we're at with this project right now are to build the pilot group, so figure out what communities we want to be involved in this planning process, and create a regional groundwater model that all communities would then use to update their wellhead protection plans. So we're all working from the same information, same vulnerability designations. So that is all that I wanted to share about the wellhead protection plan pilot project. So now we have some time for a discussion or any questions for either Valerie or myself.
Any comments or questions from the group? You can raise your hand, you can unmute, you can just speak up. Phil.
Madam Chair, Phil Klein. Yeah, Madam Chair, I guess I got a question for both. Basically, on any projects that are approved in the future, is there a way that they can have some type of water conservation component associated with it? And then also, secondly, if an organization, company has any type of chemical use, can they not define that initially and then make a strategic decision on how they're going to handle that into the future? basically, if for example, if they're going to wash computer chips, okay, how are they going to handle that that contaminated water as it comes off those chips, and what's the process going to be, and how they're going to clean it up? If we can catch this at the front end of the spectrum as opposed to the end of it, I think it'd be more beneficial. Just your thoughts.
I can jump in and take a stab at some of those questions. Yeah, water conservation, that is right in the front of our faces today, right now. And yeah, I think that is a good idea to incorporate that into any future project. I know, there have been incentives for communities to do water conservation, or, the Met Council, for example, has grant programs for water conservation. So I think that is a good idea to keep at the front of our minds as we're working on this project, to incorporate a component. And as for chemical use, that's not my area of expertise, but yes, that seems like a really good plan to require some, mitigation work. I know a challenge of that is, if we find out, like PFAS, we didn't know it was in the water, or we don't know the human impacts right now. So that's always going to be a challenge. But yeah, otherwise it's not my area, so I don't want to say anything incorrectly. So yeah, Valerie, if you had any comments.
Sure. I think yeah, similar to you. I don't think I have much to say about more of the chemical response piece of it, or identifying the chemicals up front, since that's probably a different organization working with MPCA. Would be controlling that a little bit more. But as far as water conservation, as part of so we're not really focusing on that as far as our agricultural chemical reduction effort, because it's really mostly focused on agricultural chemicals. But one of the pieces that we're going to be talking about with farmers is the irrigation management piece of it. So there is a water conservation portion of that, but also proper irrigation management also reduces chemical leaching into the groundwater. So there's kind of a two-prong approach to that. And then as part of our Dakota County groundwater source water protection collaborative, one of the items or topics that the cities and those that were interested in it, they stated that actually water conservation was probably one of the top two items that they want to discuss and collaborate on. So how can we at the county level develop maybe a water conservation collaborative consortium. We were looking at how can we commit to each other for reduction in water usage. So that's going to be one of the topics that we're going to be bringing up as part of that collaborative, since that was one of the top interests. The other interest that they had was how can we share resources? How can we do water conservation, looking at land use, sharing data. So those are kind of like the big key things that we're going to be focusing on when we meet together. Hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions, comments? We have a little bit of extra time because Lisa confirmed that she is not going to be able to make it today. So that actually gives us the opportunity, if you're interested, to talk a little bit about the drought issue that is hanging over our heads at the moment. If anybody wants to share a local experience, or if any of our staff wanted to give an update.
Madam Chair, this is Sandeep Berman from the Department of Health. So very timely topic on the drought. Before that, I just wanted to comment a little bit on the multi-community wellhead protection pilot project that Met Council is working with us at the Department of Health on.
Yes, go ahead.
So if I may, I just wanted to commend the council for taking on that task. And it is sort of a logical extension of the conventional wellhead protection planning work the Department of Health does under the state wellhead protection rule. That's kind of was the first generation of wellhead protection. We're through with that. And in the metro area, it's always been a challenge to have those conventional plans, how truly effective they are given just the density of the water use, how close these communities are to each other, and they're all fairly heavy users with growing populations. So you see that these delineations kind of run into each other. We saw the capture zones kind of overlap. And I think that acceptance and realization that these water sources, surface water or the groundwater aquifers, really are a shared resource. Like they extend kind of beyond the municipal boundaries and the community borders, and really have to be managed as a single, consistent, kind of connected resource. That's a very important concept, and it's really timely that that concept is beginning to be accepted by more and more communities, and there's a real desire to kind of go outside the community boundaries. So I think this pilot project is important. It's probably the way of the future, and the council is very well situated to lead this. So we're very excited to work with the council on this pilot project, and hopefully it'll set the tone for kind of how the next generation of wetland protection planning is done. And there's a lot that the council can bring to bear on this. Its own authorities and jurisdictions in the metro area that kind of cuts across the municipal boundaries. Council is also kind of the owner of the metro model, and that is probably going to play an important role in this effort going forward. And the Department of Health, we're positioning ourselves to assist and provide more value to the council in this pilot, and hopefully see it expand more and more. So a very important, very timely concept, the multi-community wetland protection planning, and we are definitely very supportive of it, and I'm very pleased to partner with the council on this. I just wanted to just express that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, it's Phil Klein again. Yeah, Madam Chair, yeah, I just wanted to mention that, we were at the Land Use Advisory Committee yesterday when we had that meeting. I wanted to make this mention as well. We do have stormwater ponds that we've been using to help irrigate during this drought situation. And we've been finding that those who are connected to those ponds have been being very generous with their lawn watering. And anyways, we're looking at, as a matter of fact, last night we talked about, we are going to implement some type of water restrictions on lawns, even out of the stormwater ponds as we continue into this drought. The ponds are starting to get low, and some people just feel that they have the ability to pull whatever they want. We did have, in a few instances, where we had a couple of residences who had hooked up their garden hoses and actually tried to fill the stormwater ponds, which is insanity, but that did happen in a couple instances. But anyway, I guess I just wanted to make mention that we are looking at restricting the water usage out of our stormwater ponds during this drought. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So, Madam Chair, Jeff Berg from MDA.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just a FYI for MOSAC, and I was looking if a DNR was representative on this call, and I don't see Jack Gleason. So this is led by Minnesota DNR, but if certain drought thresholds are met, and I don't know the details, then Minnesota DNR calls a Minnesota Drought Task Force. Those thresholds have been met, so tomorrow is the first meeting of the Minnesota Drought Task Force. I'm aware it's made up of federal agencies, state agencies, and I think, I don't know if you know, Madam Chair, or others, I think Met Council is represented as well, but the benchmark for drought unfortunately have been met, so the Minnesota Drought Task Force could start meeting tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you. Vanya or Sam, do you know anything about all of that?
Madam Chair, I can jump in. I
Go
was
ahead.
going to add something to that point anyway, and I think I had my hand up virtually, of course. Ali
I missed it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. Ali Al Hassan will be our representative on that task force. And my understanding is that there's a ranked, Lanyo would know a lot more, ranked set of uses with water supply for humans being number one and the last use to be dealt with. But this task force talks about reducing uses in order to preserve the supply for public water supplies. And then second to that would be industry. And that task force, my understanding is, came from the drought levels in the 80s, which was the last time we saw something approaching this level of, or even surpassing this level of severity. And then on that point, some of you may know the wastewater function that the Met Council runs for the region gets involved when the Mississippi River at St. Paul, so this is below the confluence of the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River, when the flow level gets below 4,000 cubic feet per second and a set dissolved oxygen concentration around 5.5-ish milligrams per liter, which is the amount that we need in the river to support aquatic life, we will actually start oxygenating our effluent at the Metro plant to support the dissolved oxygen levels in the river. We've had to activate that twice so far this summer, and we anticipate having to do it again as those flows are really, really low. And again, that 4,000 is below where the two rivers meet. Above that, the Mississippi's at a fairly critically low flow level as well. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I am not seeing any hands raised. Lanya, did you have any more you wanted to add to that?
Hi, am I coming through all right?
Yes.
I'm not going to add a lot of detail. I think once the task force meets kind of some of those details will be updated. But I do want to maybe seed some thinking for our following conversation. When we developed some of the materials for this meeting, we weren't thinking at a real focused level about drought, but I think that there are some interesting land use and water supply, source water protection, drought resilience connections to be made. And so as we think about programs like the Water Efficiency Grant Program that came out of thinking about drought the last time around, how can we expand or target programs like that so that we are more drought resilient? Are there parts of the metro or certain users that maybe we might want to start to focus on in any next phase of efficiency work? So that's a question to all the committee members. Programs like the lawn turf grass research that we've been doing with the University of Minnesota, are there landscapes that we could be thinking of that might be more drought resilient? Phil, I appreciated your point about sort of our stormwater management and water supply in a drought environment. Are there some approaches that we might want to brainstorm about? So I think keeping some of those ideas in mind as it relates to water supply and even the source water protection, thinking about water conservation, water efficiency. If we are using less water, we're not pulling water from as far away. So there's a little bit about, how do we focus the areas that we are protecting for source water and its relationship to water use and conservation. So I probably just threw a whole bunch of ideas at you, but talking about source water, water supply, and land use together in the context of drought, I think is really very interesting right now.
Thank you. I think we're up then for Emily to do the next couple of slides.
Yes, just 2 slides, and I'll get through them quickly, and then we'll get on to our group activity. So if you can go to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you. All right, so I wanted to share this map of our plan for the year and where we are today in shaping the draft problem statements and recommended actions. So the input from both MOSAC and TAC meetings for all these topics for this year will be incorporated into the 2022 report to the legislature, and it will be reviewed and revised by both MOSAC and TAC committees before final approval and before sharing with Met Council and the legislature. So we will have future opportunities for MOSAC to continue honing the report content. Starting from today, from this meeting, we will be discussing report progress, as well as asking for volunteers to help between the meetings. Next slide. So we've already started this iterative process with material from our last MOSAC and TAC meetings on water supply or water quality and contamination. This figure shows the process we are taking and will continue undertaking to incorporate the committee comments from these meetings into the report to the legislature. So again, it's going to be an iterative process between council, MOSAC, and TAC throughout the year, allowing time and space for feedback. So again, we will be looking for volunteers to help review draft language before sharing with sub-regional work groups, which is step 4, before we finalize the report. So I wanted to share the plan from here on out, and now Lanya will lead the group in our group exercise activity.
Thank you, Emily and Valerie, Phil, everybody who has shared so far. So we've shared some high-level background information, some local perspectives, and before this meeting, you all did have a chance to look at the materials that were attached to the agenda. So you have on our website, on your website, the memo document that lays out the proposed problem statement and some possible approaches to help tackle water supply and land use interactions. So hope you've had a chance to review those. So we're going to be spending a fair chunk of time in group discussion and a group activity. So Greg, if you would bring up the second presentation, I'll just walk you through what I'm proposing that we do before we dive in. It may be helpful for you to have open the memo of recommendations if you want to kind of see more detailed information. We are going to be using Mural. So Tessa, thank you. Earlier today, sent out an email to all of you, all committee members, with a link to the Mural website. So in a moment, I'll ask you all to use that link that Tessa sent in her email to go into the Mural website, which will be in a separate window from this WebEx meeting. But before we do that, let me just walk you through really quickly what we're going to do. And this will be very similar to what we did at our last meeting. So next slide, Greg. Again, Mural is just a digital workspace for visual collaboration. It's an online whiteboard. We're still trying to work together in this remote meeting space. And so this is one of the tools we have. There is a link in this presentation to some Mural tutorial videos. So if you haven't had a chance to use that and want to learn more, that's a great resource for you. There's some nice YouTube playlist about how to use Mural. Next slide. So this is roughly what the tool is going to look like when you get there. And I wanted to just walk you through again what we'll be asking you to do. You can add content by editing some of these existing blank sticky notes, these little orangey yellow rectangles that you'll see. You just double click on them and you should be able to edit the text. Or when you double click, you might accidentally add a new sticky note and you can just write text in there. This might get messy, no worries. Our goal is to add content. So you can try to edit one. If it doesn't work, try again. And if that still doesn't work, feel free to raise your hand and share your comment verbally, and we will add that for you. To navigate around this space, there are a few different ways. One way is that you can follow me, the facilitator. So down on the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little gold circle with LR. And if you move your mouse over it, a window should pop up with an option to follow Lanya Ross. And so you can click that and you'll just go wherever I go. Another way to move around the space is to use the outline option, which is over on the right side. So you can see there's a little box that says outline, and there's a couple of boxes below it, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you click on that, it will just automatically bring you to the content related to that. Or you can just move by clicking and dragging your mouse. If you click and then you can just drag yourself around. Or you can use the Control+ or Control- if you like keyboards like I do. So those are just some tips to keep in mind. For those of you who can't tell, I'm stalling a little bit to give everybody time to go into the mural board. I see many of you are there, so we'll move over there in just a moment. If anybody is having trouble with accessing Mural, why don't you let us know now, raise your hand or give a verbal shout out. Sounds like things are going pretty good. All right, I'm going to walk you through what we're going to talk about, and then we're going to dive in since it seems like people are having a pretty good time accessing Mural board. Next slide, Greg. We are going to spend a little bit of time, a couple minutes, just looking at the problem statement and the goal. And this is the text that is also in that memorandum attached to the agenda. So I'll give you a little bit of time to read and digest that and get a feel for how you react to it. Next slide. Maybe slow down, Greg. We can go on to the next slide. I do want to spend some time giving you the opportunity to share your suggestions. So what would make the problem statement or the goal stronger? What would you change? So we'll spend a little bit of brainstorming time there. And then we may take time to let you use some sort of sticky dot exercise to highlight anything that you really want to amplify that your colleagues have said. Greg, next slide. I do want to spend a fair amount of time looking at some of the solutions, and those are ideas that we pulled from different interviews and past meetings. So to get you a chance to review those and then maybe help us sort them and rank them. Is there anything missing? What would make the biggest impact? What might be easiest to implement? So we'll spend some time working on that. Next slide, Greg. And then we do have a little bit more time in this meeting, so if we have the opportunity, we might pick one of those actions if something bubbles to the top and spend some time discussing what we might be able to start now. So are there some existing efforts that we could use as a model? Who might be some good leaders or partners? And what expectations do we have for how we might want to step into that work? So that's the big overview of what we're proposing to do. If it's useful and you don't want to be in Mural, this presentation gives you a sense of what we're doing, so you can follow along that way if you would like. But I think that if we dive into Mural, it might be the most interactive way that we can all share information together. So that's what I am going to do. Unless anybody has a question or a comment before I switch screen. Tessa or Wendy, do you see any hands up?
I do not see any.
Excellent.
I don't either, so let's go for it.
Lanya?
Yep.
This is Susan. Greg, if you could, I do not see that Tessa was moved to a co-host so she could see hands raised. Can you promote her?
Good
Or
catch, Susan.
monitor her hands, whichever the case might be. Thank you.
All right. So I am going to share my screen. So all of the committee members should be in Mural at this point. So you will be working in that application. For those of you following along on the website, I'm hoping that you are seeing my Google Chrome screen. Does that seem to be working? I'm going to give a shout out to my hidden partners. Henry or John, does that screen look visible to you? I'm watching my Microsoft Teams application in the background.
Lanya, I can see what looks like you in the mural with things moving around.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, and for those of you following along, if you cannot see it clearly, we will be copying all of this content into the minutes, so you will not miss anything. So have you all had a chance to read over the problem statement and goal? Let me give you 30 seconds. All right. Does anybody need more time? Maybe just a verbal shout out, I need more time? Okay. I would like to just poll the group really quickly. On a scale of 8 being I like it, down to 1, I absolutely want to block this, I veto the proposal. I'd like to know how you feel about how the problem statement and goal look right now. So I'm going to do a dot voting exercise. The dots will be really tiny, but just put your mouse and click on one of these numbers. 8, yes, like it, 1, So let me get that started for you. And you're only going to get 1 vote each. And everybody can vote. Go ahead. Those of you who wonder how long I'm taking, I have a little poll saying how many people are voting. So about half of you have voted. A couple people still thinking it over. Give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see what you're thinking. All right. 3 votes in the 6, so not complete endorsement, but okay. Some votes for agreeing with reservations. You can live with it. And a couple of votes for 7 and 8. And 1 for 4. So nobody wants to block it. Good. But it looks like it could be a little bit stronger. So I am going to have us move on to another portion of this exercise. Let's revise the problem. So I'm moving over to the content under the heading, what would make your support stronger? So I'd like to just give you a couple of minutes, maybe a minute or so, to share your suggestions that could strengthen the problem statement or the goal. So I see some of you are moving around. That's exactly what I want to see. Double click, start editing text. If you double click in the white space, you'll probably add a new sticky. You might be thinking of the challenge differently. So feel free to say, what you're thinking about. Maybe you have a really clear vision of how you want things to be. So feel free to share those thoughts. If you're worried about missing an opportunity, if we don't do something differently, call that out. Or if you just want to make a wordsmithing change, that is very welcome as well. So I will put a timer on. Let's just give it a minute and we'll see how things go. And if anybody's having trouble in mural and wants to add an idea out loud verbally, absolutely please feel free to share. I am going to zoom in a little bit. This might make it easier for those who are following along to see some of the content. Is that a little bit clearer for everybody? How are we doing? We want another half a minute, minute or so? Or are we good? Give it another 30 seconds. I see a couple of comments. And for those of you who are done commenting, I hope you take a moment and can read through some of the ideas shared by others already. So we're seeing things like providing funding support, penalties or fines for lack of adherence to policies, uniform testing services provided by an impartial organization, some wordsmithing changes, long-lasting contamination instead of legacy. One component of planning for future land use changes, but we need to address existing land use issues. How do we fix what has been done? I like the question, is it just waste or does that seem too narrow? Do we want to use the word pollution? Shorten the goal, concise, I like, make it actionable. So we'll have to think of stronger language. Land use and source water protection will be understood and action implemented. More assistance for communities that want to clean up sources of contamination, some incentivizing private water users to update their operations. Hotline for complaints from property owners for Met Council. That's the scariest thing I've heard all year, I think. Does anybody want to, does anything here, I saw somebody seconding the shorten goal and make actionable. Does anybody else want to highlight something that's been said so far? Can do this audibly or ask a question for more clarification. Any hands raised, Tessa?
I do not see any.
I know some of you are introverts and some of you are extroverts, so I'm trying to, we're trying to make space for both here in these remote meetings, which is always a challenge. So. I wanted to just give you an opportunity to highlight any ideas that these colleagues shared. So I'm going to give a really short dot voting exercise since you're all very quiet. You each get 3 because 3 is the magic number. And you can use none or up to 3 and just put a little dot on anything you think should be highlighted here. And I know they are very tiny when they show up. I can tell people are reading the details, so I'll give it a little bit more time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you didn't get to vote and you want to share your thought, happy to do it verbally as well. So we see quite a variety of comments highlighted. Shortening the goal, definitely something we need to work on. People wanted to call out the idea of incentivizing private water users. Providing funding support was highlighted. And then also some of the other comments on wordsmithing and some penalties and fines. Thank you. That was really helpful. That helps staff as we go through this information. So, kind of warming up to thinking what we want to do. Now, I would like you to think, we talked about wanting to be more actionable, more clear and actionable. So this might get at some of that. In the memo that was attached to the agenda, there was a list of ideas that had been proposed. We heard those in meetings. We heard some suggestions through some of the interviews with different members. We heard that from TAC. And so that was the source of those recommendations. And it was a couple of pages of some possible actions that we could take related to water supply and land use. And they are all included here. So your zoom control plus control minus or zoom in, zoom out might be useful for you. We did bring these to TAC and we were able to do a little bit of sorting, although we ran into a little bit of technical issues. So this is not really well sorted by TAC, but I wanted to give you some time to read these proposed solutions. They're also in the memo. And think about how well you think they're going to help us achieve this goal of empowering source water protection. If there's anything missing, add a sticky note, add your ideas, or you could drag something over from that last exercise. And then I also want you to think about each of these actions, and if you see it as having a big or long-term impact, move that to the right side of the quadrants. If you think it's more of an immediate or a short-term impact, keep it on the left. And if you think it's going to be easy to implement, move it up towards the top. And if you think it's going to be harder, move it down towards the bottom. And this is very general, I know, but it just starts to get us thinking about some of these different challenges and different actions. I will tell you they're different colors because we sorted them. So the purple are more financial related actions. The orange are outreach and engagement related things. That light blue are more research focused activities. The green are some of the more regulatory type activities. And the dark greenish blue is regional policy. So I will put, I'm going to put 2 minutes here because I want to give you enough time to read.
And Lanya, I just had a quick question. I noticed that
Yeah.
one of the comments, it's really focused on financial incentives for developers to implement BMPs. Well, we have a
Yeah.
lot of existing landowners and it could be individual landowners or large agricultural landowners. So I would say, I don't know if we can edit that, but it shouldn't be financial incentive just for developers, but it should be for landowners to do the right thing as well. And I think there's existing programs in that case as well.
Yeah, so you're kind of thinking over here. So I want to say,
Yeah, so you already have one that said developers, but it should be extended beyond just developers.
And Emily, if you find it too, you feel free to catch me in. Developers. And if you want to add in, and like, so thank you for that. I appreciate the verbal comment too. We can add, anybody else wants to add anything, that's very welcomed. Or you can add your own and just tack it on. Or go in and edit this existing text, feel free. For those of you who are following along, you should be able to double click on the text in there and then you can go in and edit it. Thank you, Emily. You see, we want to take another minute. There's kind of a little to read here. Is anybody opposed if I add another minute to the timer? I'm going to show your, I'm showing your cursors now so I can kind of see where people are at and if you're still reading. All right. Thank you all for taking that time to digest this. As you looked at these, I wondered if, I've done this with dot voting, but that's kind of individual and I think group discussion can be useful. So I wanted to offer the opportunity to have more of a out loud discussion about this. So I wanted to know if you would maybe want to spend the next 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes or so, talking about some of these proposed actions. For example, starting with the financial approaches in purple. Would anyone, any of the committee members, be willing to share which one of those you think is the most useful or perhaps just the most interesting and why? Or perhaps there's one you have more of a concern about. And some members here who I know are here but haven't had a chance to speak yet today. Mike, are you still here? Do you have anything that jumped out at you?
Nothing jumped out at me. I'm still here. I'm just digesting it though. There's a lot.
Yeah. Was there any other, are there, when you think about land use and water supply, is there any of these others that you find interesting, or outreach versus financial that you think is more valuable to focus on?
Well, and personally, I think that the thing I'm seeing that's represented very well in here is financial, because I think that financial is ultimately a powerful lever amongst either incentivizing or providing support to those who already want to do it.
Thank you for letting me put you on the spot.
Sure. the only other thing I'd add is that we tend to focus on landowners and property owners, but there's a lot of people who may be involved with, as secondary land beneficiaries, such as renters or lessees of land, and don't necessarily have a vested interest in that directly. So
Yeah.
that some of the financial levers might be not necessarily reached with them because they may not see it, or their landowners say, well, I don't really care, right? Because I'm already getting money from the land or property being leased or rented.
Right. Yeah,
And
that is something.
so I think that's kind of that's a gap there, I would see.
Thank you for that. Did anybody else feel that there's a gap either in the financial approaches or in one of the other areas?
Lanya, this is Jamie.
Yeah.
So in the far left, lower left, there's one of the purple boxes that talks about state and Met Council providing funding for grants to communities that are prioritizing redevelopment or high density. And what caught my eye about that is it was so specific about redevelopment and high density, and there's other land use types. I think as we're presenting this to a broad audience, maybe we be careful that we don't hone in on something that maybe is really important in some localities, but we're thinking whole metro or whole community. Redevelopment and high housing density, there can be some source water issues there, but they aren't necessarily the land uses that come to my mind immediately as causes of those issues.
Is there?
Wanya, this is Wendy.
Yeah.
And I looked at that one too, and I didn't see that as being a cause. I saw that as being a carrot, but it still had a kind of it provoked concern because the council is already prioritizing transit and highway money and livable communities money on places that are doing high density and redevelopment. And to me, the money should be tied to getting the best bang for the buck and cleaning things up and making it better, not as a carrot because a community has high density housing or is prioritizing redevelopment. I mean, you got to clean up where the problems are, not use that as a tool to either encourage high density development or reward high density development if that's how that's supposed to read. Does that make sense?
I think so. To me, does anybody have any questions? Make sense to others or need some clarifying or want to revise that? I apologize to all of you who are following along. I'm just checking my language here. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jeff Berg, I was just gonna make another observation here. So, I mean, I'm not making a judgment, good, bad, or indifferent, but all these incentive ones say state of Minnesota, and then some say others. So observation, was there a reason for that, or just kind of because it was easier?
That, if there's somebody assigned here, it's because in some conversation that we've had around that came out. State of Minnesota could be Clean Water Fund funding. It might be, we know that there's some existing incentive programs or programs. So it's not set in stone by any means. And we can be more general. That's a very good observation. Do you have a suggestion for what might be preferable? Or is this kind of keep it focused on the outcome sort of activity?
It was just observation, but what I was thinking about here is the state of Minnesota, has no authority over land use. So in some cases, it should be more. So I guess if there's a reason that state of Minnesota, so be it. But maybe you want to be more general and say partners or whatever. But just observation. I don't actually have a strong opinion.
Okay, everybody following along, I apologize, but I'm just putting in a big reminder. I will clean up my spelling later. No, that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Lanya, I'm also struck by, the vision felt very forward-looking to me. Like the vision was a lot of what can we do moving forward to make sure we don't create those long-lasting problems. But then a lot of these are about dealing with the last ones, dealing with the legacy contamination. So I think we have to try to parse that out. Maybe it's a two-part. I mean, I think some people said in the vision that past needed to be recognized. But then these some of them are forward-looking, but a lot of them are dealing with old stuff. So separating that and getting some clarity there would probably be helpful.
Yeah, this is Jamie. I agree with that. One or two of the boxes that caught my eye because they were more forward-looking dealt with enhancing the connection in local plans, local comprehensive plans between land use planning and WSMAs or other source water related mapping applications. So I thought those were good things.
Excellent. Great. Would anybody else like to add a comment? And here I'll put myself on the spot. We have a couple of regional policy approaches, those two dark green ones. Are there, I mean, a little bit of the sort of forward thinking and the connection to planning might fit into that. Are there some thoughts about the role of regional policy or planning that we might want to make sure we're keeping in mind as we develop some recommendations?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when we talk about regional planning, or sorry, when we talk about that card over here about what was it? I just said, yeah, when protection is as a critical public health issue, does that mean a crucial public health issue? Does that mean enforcement would come through like MDH or something like that?
And you are you looking at one of these comments?
Yeah, I'm looking at the card in the far right on
Okay.
above the main line. Yeah, this one right here. So so I guess if it's associated as a crucial public health issue, does that imply that we're asking to or suggesting enforcement should be done with another organization like Department of Health?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer to that, but we have Department of Health here.
Well,
what are the pros and cons?
This is Catherine from PCA, and I don't know that I really read that as a enforcement thing, but just as so much as sort of a goal, like that the what's in the source water matters for public health, particularly as we find more and more things that are hard to treat. So I guess I didn't read it as like something that needed to be enforced on so much as just a recognition that needed to be shared and brought and elevated.
I ask because it's as a policy card. Well, policy is meaningless unless there's enforcement to the policy. So who does enforcement? Right, and that's it. I'm not expecting an answer, but it's kind of to some degree it's a little bit of a rhetorical question of like who should be, and that's kind of the, I mean, is one of those things. Are we suggesting of policies that should be that may rightly so have implications in other areas too, or maybe maybe stronger because they have enforceability through multiple agencies.
Well, I really appreciate your bringing this up because this is very interesting territory for the Metropolitan Council because our water supply is not a regional system.
Mhm.
And you know, it's the responsibility, and it's done for the most part incredibly well at the local level. But land use planning is a piece that the council does have a fairly clear role in working with, you know, local plans and making sure that there's that consistency piece. So when we talk about land use and water supply, we're getting into these different roles that the council has. So your perspectives on that are very helpful. And so, you know, when communities update their local comprehensive plans, right, there is the expectation that they will be consistent with the council policies and, you know, sort of expected information that's in the system statements. So that's one example of a kind of one way to sort of enforce some of this if there's a land use piece, but we want to make sure that it was, you know, consistent and appropriate for our role, that we wouldn't be overstepping our authorities, right? That's not what we want to do. So that's one way we could enforce that would be outside of the state agencies. I'm by no means proposing any of that. I'm just throwing that out there as food for thought. I think that there's also, because it's such a crucial piece, Catherine, the point you raised, you know, it's important to note that source water is just so important to our communities. I think that's one of the reasons we do hear highlighted the need for continued education and engagement. So people know where their water comes from and they know what it's impacted by. So that's another piece that I hear a lot about. And the council has a role in sharing technical information.
One bit I'm not sure how to capture, where to capture it, is that there's education for those who are in communities related to watershed or to water sourcing. But, you know, having spent 9 years in planning commission in my own community, there was like zero education related to water sourcing in our community. It was always like, oh, city engineer says do this, city engineer says do this. So it's like as community members who were empowered to provide recommendations to council, we really didn't have any information on this. And, you know, most of our, if we did do, seminars on or go to training, it was really focused on city planning. But, you know, water, that wasn't even talked about. It was just the assumption you'd always have clean water. So is there, I guess maybe the kind of working into that question of that is maybe it's an education outreach piece for communities to have that as part of their planning processes, as part of their community governances and things. So that way their community members who are feeding these policy decisions can have a more informed perspective.
Thank you for that. Before we end this, I'm just keeping an eye on the time here, and I want to respect everybody's time and move on because we have little pieces to cover. I wanted to just bring up the drought issue again, kind of that community education. Do we know where our water comes from? Do we know what impacts it? And if you're a surface water user, you're impacted by drought on the river, which is a different thing than if you're a groundwater user and their kind of drought impacts. So I just wanted to give you a chance to look at these comments and think about this a little bit in the context of drought resilience and see if you want to add anything, if there's anything missing here.
Lanny, this is Jamie. Just an off-the-cuff response to that is, you know, drought is one kind of emergency, but there can be other kinds of emergencies, like contamination emergencies, that it's very important that we be able to respond to.
very good point. But emergency planning in general. Me too. I can't spell. I just added a little comment where to put emergency response. Just dropped. Okay. Thank you for that. This continues to be open, and I know that you'll continue to look at this. I wanted to, all of this is important. So this question I'm going to ask does not mean that we're picking one thing and ignoring everything else. But I wanted to end by shifting the conversation a little to ask if anybody has anything that they see on here or something that hasn't been mentioned, but they think it would be really important to start now. Is there an action that we could take, a research project, an incentive program, an outreach or engagement program, a pot of money, a fund we could develop? I mean, if there's something that you think would be really important for us to start now, what would it be? And I'm thinking kind of related to land use and planning.
So let me throw this is Mike. Let me throw the elephant in the room out there because you mentioned the drought. The matter of fact is that if you look at the underground water sources we have are finite. The amount of water that comes from the sky is finite, and of course the heat and and lack of water sourcing from the atmosphere is decreasing over time. Then the question is that then in order to fulfill the needs, we would either need to both decrease the usage and increase our reserves. And the only way we could increase reserves is building something, whether it's construction of underground storage, or at the local levels or individual levels, or building larger reservoirs within the state somewhere. And so the latter of those two is something we require large capital and willingness and land planning to do.
Okay.
Right. And that would fall right into the Met Council's purview. That's right. Because if someone said, okay, if someone had a crystal ball and said, we're going to have severe droughts and we're going to need this amount of water and we won't be able to get it, then that becomes a problem. So I think the question is that should we be not necessarily looking at making policy around building large reservoirs, but understanding what that long-term consequences of weather patterns and drought, to understand if 10, 20 years from now, should we be working our way up to prepare to build those things, right? Because now it's not the time to go, we wouldn't build reactively, but to start understanding, are there weather patterns leading and the water uses leading to that strategically?
So I'm hearing some focus on some work to assess future water capacity.
Water capacity against anticipated usage, right? So because, I mean, think of it like the state of California. By nature, it's a desert, right? Well, putting 15 million people in Northern California, another 30 million people in Southern California, you're going to consume more water than this physically there. So what do you have to do? Build dams and reservoirs, right? And that's out of necessity because of growth. Now here we're kind of the other side where we have a lot of people, we have enough water. What are the weather patterns and reservoirs changing to the point where we need to plan ahead, because we don't want to be reacting to the curve. So I think the research is where's the curve going?
Thank you for stepping up and proposing something. Does anybody else, should we just explore that, or does anybody else want to counter with something else?
Lanya, Kevin Watson put in the chat, how do you incentivize political bodies that are less interested in enforcing stricter rules for conservation? Feel like penalties will not be effective and just create contention.
That's a great question. Thank you for sharing.
But we actually had that come up when I was on the Lakeville City Council. It wasn't that the council was not interested in conservation, but when it was required as part of our well permits from the DNR. But we had some people who just decided they didn't care, and you know, it was worth paying the fine to water when it wasn't your day or whatever. I mean, you know, there are some people where money just really doesn't matter. And it got to the point where we upped the fine where it doubled each violation to, you know, but still, if people have an inordinate amount of money, they really don't care how many times you double the fine. But the thing that came up for us when we were on the city council, when I was on the city council, was we were doing water conservation, but the neighboring township had 3-acre lots with septic systems and wells that could water all they wanted to, and there were no restrictions on them.
Right.
And we were all pulling from the same aquifer.
There are 60, 70,000 private wells here in the metropolitan area. Okay, I'm my brain is shorting out because I'm an hour behind all of you because I'm in Michigan right now. And I'm getting to that tired time of day. But I'm kind of putting these two ideas together, and I'm wondering, I'm gonna move us. We've got some good ideas to think about, these sort of big actions that we could take that could kind of help advance our work and our thinking. And I'm going to just move us over as we sort of wind down here, but thinking about research project or about the sort of challenge of incentivizing versus penalties as potential actions for either one of those, and this is to the whole committee too, are there examples of existing efforts or projects or community or state programs that you see could be a model that could be expanded on, or, you know, sort of a case study we could look at to help us think what might a better approach look like? You know, and thank you, Wendy, because you shared a local example of the challenge and how to wrestle with it.
Lanya,
Are there other?
Lanya, if I may, Phil Klein.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know here in the city of Hugo, I know when we have developers approach us to develop a particular piece of property, we do ask them to strongly consider putting in some type of water conservation project or like irrigation systems that will work off of like a stormwater pond. And we've had very good luck with that. And we told them that we would help them. We would first of all help support them, number one. But secondly, also they could use it as a selling point to sell their homes. And I think most people want to do the right thing, and that is conserve water. And then if they have an opportunity to do so, they will. But you have to provide some type of guidance to the developers in order to do so. And this seems like once you get the whole community behind you, the developers are going to jump in and start doing some things to help support that as well. Your council has to be on board with it. I think that they have to take the leadership role to make that happen. But then once that's done, you can ask developers to help, you know, facilitate that direction, as opposed to giving fines and penalties. To me, that seems like an easy way out. I think you get more with sugar than you do with a stick, and I think it has, well, I should say this, it has worked here in our community very well. And a lot of community and a lot of developers are now instituting some type of water conservation plan or project in their development.
Thanks, Phil. This is Wendy again. One thing that worked spectacularly well for Lakeville was instituting time of day restrictions for irrigation, you know, for if you're whether and I mean the physics work for if you're agriculture or residential, but or even commercial for that matter, if you have landscaping that you're watering. If you don't water during the heat of the day, more water makes it to the ground rather than evaporating as it's coming out of your sprinklers. I'm surprised frequently as I'm driving around rural areas to see agriculture irrigation equipment running in the middle of the day. And I guess I don't really understand why the state doesn't require farmers to irrigate when it's not in the heat of the day. Because I mean, you can lose up to 75% of the water to evaporation when you're doing that. Anybody here know?
Jeff, do you know about that? I mean, my guess would be based off of I think one of the irrigators group was presenting not too long ago at one of the subcommittee meetings. But they said it could take up to 24 to 48 hours basically just to do one full rotation. So if they were to stop and only do during the evenings, that might really impact their ability to actually water. But maybe Jeff Berg knows a little bit more information. But Wendy, I think what you were saying hits on like inconsistencies across, I mean, just across the county. One of the things that came up and was brought up during when we were developing the groundwater plan was each city kind of has their own thing that they're doing, which creates inconsistencies across the entire, just this one case county, and then confuses people what standards, what they can and can't do. I'm sure it applies to more than just, water irrigation. In fact, I moved to Lakeville and I was used to Apple Valley regulations. I actually got a water irrigation notice because I was following Apple Valley rules instead of Lakeville. I was like, great, this is what I do for a living, and I just got a watering notice in Lakeville. Let me reread that ordinance. But yeah, those inconsistencies can really, I think, lead to some confusion. But then, like at the county level, that was something that we brought up, and the county didn't want to take over setting the restriction at a county level. So I don't know if it makes sense to even set restrictions at a higher level than just local county.
Well, like I said, some things just make sense as far as, the time of day. What exact beginning and end time, I don't know is what is optimal, but time of day, not watering at 1 o'clock in the afternoon
Yeah.
is typically a good idea. There are other things that the DNR has encouraged cities to use in their well permitting process that are not good at conserving water, like you can only water every other day. Lakeville has that. And you
That's what got me.
instituted both of those at the same time. But what I've observed with people is when you're not sure, sometimes you'll water just because it's going to be a while before it's your day again. I have some neighbors that just automatically now water every other day, where they might have watered twice a week or once a week, or maybe they don't even have a sprinkler system. I don't have a sprinkler system, but like if you're even and you're coming up on the end of the month and it's looking, is it going to rain or not? And you're trying to decide, you might throw your sprinkler out just because you don't want to have to wait so many days if it doesn't rain, kind of a thing. So while it gives you some consistency for the city in terms of water use, only half of the city could possibly water at one time. The overall amount of water that goes out is actually more, I think, and I had confirmed that in the past with our city public work people, but it encourages people to water more than if you didn't have that in place, because you can't put an every third day watering or every fifth day. They don't work under that scenario.
So as you've been talking about this, I've been putting a couple of notes in the mural board, and we'll include these in the minutes as well. One of the things that I heard was needing to set clear expectations and being consistent. And then also wanting recommendations to have proven desired results, trying to, really thinking about what the unintended consequences might be. Those are a couple of things that I heard through some of this conversation, but I would welcome anybody else to, add in their thinking as well. I am looking at the clock, and in the interest of time, I wanted to say we've covered a lot of ground, and you really helped to revise and stretch and shape this thinking. And so this will go into some revised recommendations and content that will ultimately be included in a draft report. So you'll be seeing another version of this. And this was incredibly helpful, so thank you very much. Wendy, if you're okay with it, I will turn this back over to you, and I see that the next item is a brief legislative update. Unless anybody has anything final they want to make sure to add.
Going once, going twice. Okay, not hearing anybody else wanting to add, we'll move on to Sam for the legislative update.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Landia. That was a great discussion and all the participants. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really briefly, good news. The last budget session of the Minnesota legislature, I think one of the first budgets that was passed and appropriated was the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment. And the Met Council received just over $3 million for the next fiscal biennium. So that's 2022 and 2023. Which starts really now. The entire fund, the Clean Water Fund, was appropriated at a little over 250 million. And so we get about just a bit over 1% of that for metro area water supply. There's 1.8 million split evenly over those 2 years will go to projects that address emerging threats to drinking water supply, or work at cost-effective regional solutions or interjurisdictional, that's a big word, coordination and things like that. And then 1.25 million split evenly into two buckets, one for this year and one for next year, are for the water demand reduction grant program, or the water efficiency grants, which have been very popular. And I think with our weather this year, are going to be even more popular and important to helping municipalities meet their needs and support their residents. Really, I'd like to thank the state agency partners that we worked with to prioritize the work that the Clean Water Fund supports, as well as the members of the Clean Water Council. And of course, the communities that expressed support and wrote letters for the initiatives that they found priorities, which guided these dollars. And of course, the Met Council, Judd Shetman and Brooke Bordson and Ali El Hassan spend a lot of time working with the legislators to make sure they understand their options and advocating for the communities of the region. So that is it. Very good news. And back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So before we end, I want to make sure everybody had a chance to give their input. So I'm going to go down the list and have everybody have a chance to weigh in if there's anything we missed or anything you want to add or whatever. If you can't think of anything, you can say pass, but we'll go through everybody one more time just to make sure we don't miss anything. So Brad, you're first.
I do not have anything.
Great, thank you. Catherine.
I think we've covered everything.
George.
I don't believe George has the capability to speak.
Okay, well then we won't sit here waiting for him to say something. Jamie, George, you can put in the chat if you think of something.
Nothing more from Jamie.
Okay, let me get back to my list here. Jeff.
Nothing for me. Thanks for asking.
Kevin,
Back to my point in the chat about incentivizing political bodies. One thing that we recently did, we had an old kind of archaic water meter system where we went door to door, and one thing, we went to a radio read system, and one thing that we'd like to do that is this probably capacity wise out of like the realm of possibility is going to like the Water Smart program, and that could be something that I was referring to as far as incentives for municipalities, is get on a more robust sort of program like that would allow us to send out automated letters and those sort of, or emails to those residents that could be in violation of our irrigation rules or have a leak or whatever. So that's the sort of incentive I'm thinking of that would give us the tools to manage a better program for conservation.
thank you. Mike,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to say no, and then something came to mind as someone else was talking earlier, was that maybe also an incentive program around, you guys were talking about lawns, about using more indigenous plant species for landscaping, which would thereby reduce the water needs. I'm unfortunately also a lawn person too, so that might be something next time I landscape or next time someone landscapes, it might be something worth like a long-term movement towards reducing water usage. Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you. Phil,
No, everything's fine. I'm good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Valerie,
Nothing to add. Thank you.
did I miss anybody? Okay, so next step, staff's going to be drafting the report using our input, and our next meeting is on September 21st with the topic of groundwater and surface water interactions. If there is nothing more to come before the group, and do we have any staff people that need to throw something in there at the end? Did I miss anything in the chat? Vanya, you have anything?
I don't think so. I just wanted to make sure we had a big discussion. So if there's a next step that I missed, committee members say, you are going to do X, Y, Z.
Anybody? Well, then the meeting, wait, you do always have the opportunity to email later or call staff anytime you think of anything, but for now, we have no further business, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating.